So I hate to break the news, but many, if not most hotels do not wash their comforters. In this video, I don't want to ruin travel for you, but be prepared to have your eyes opened if you've never put a lot of thought into whether or not hotels wash their comforters between stays. Hey, it's Daniel Gillespie, founder of UponArriving.com and travel blogger since 2014. If you like practical travel tips and reviews, be sure to subscribe and hit that little bell icon to get updates on new videos. First, let's just clarify what we're talking about whenever we say hotel comforters or blankets. Basically, you can break down hotel blankets into different types like comforters, duvet covers, and bedspreads, but we're just lumping all these together. So for purposes of this video, just think about the thick blanket covering the top of your bed whenever you check into a hotel room, and that's what we're talking about. So how do we know that hotels don't wash their comforters? So usually at Upon Arriving, we verify this stuff with the hotel's website or by talking to hotel management, but obviously hotels are not really dying to advertise the fact that they don't wash their comforters, so we had to go about this in a different way. First, I just thought about my own personal experience. I know that I've seen stains on comforters throughout the years of staying at hotels, and in some instances, those stains looked like things that could clearly have been removed with just a good wash. So I know from my own personal experience that these comforters are not always being washed. But also I would ask you to think about how many times have you seen a housekeeping cart in the hallway? And of those times, how many times have you seen a big comforter or duvet on it? Probably not many, if any. Usually you see like towels and sheets and things like that kind of getting tossed around, but rarely do you ever see blankets. And also I started researching this question over a year ago, and since then I've stayed in a lot of hotels and I still have not seen a comforter or a duvet on a housekeeper's cart or seen them handling it. So I'm not saying that that's the case in every hotel that they're not doing this, but I know that if they were washing them between every stay, I would see this a lot more often. But these are just personal accounts, and I didn't want to base this video on just my own personal experience. So I went and did a lot of research and found reports from people who worked for hotels. Now, these are online anonymous reports, so they could be falsified, but here's the thing. If you do enough research in this area, you'll start to see the trends, and I do believe that these accounts give a pretty accurate general picture of how things work at hotels. So let's see what they have to say. So the first account comes from Quora, and they say the only time we did the blankets or the bedspreads was if something was spilled on them, even if it was a smoking or pet approved room. So this is a problem because whenever you check in with the pet, you pay a pet fee, and that's supposed to go to cleaning up the room on a deeper level, which surely should require them to clean up or to wash the comforter. And sometimes those pet-friendly rooms do have kind of an odor, so maybe there is some truth to this where that comforter is not getting washed, and maybe that's contributing some to that. But a bigger thing here is this recurring theme that hotels are not going to wash a blanket unless there is a visible problem. So this could be something really gross like blood, or you can just use your imagination. But the idea is that unless there is something foul or obviously stained on the comforter, it's just not getting washed. The next data point comes from Reddit. I run a 19-room hotel with 2 employees. Like me and my wife are going to put 6 comforters and linens in our 2 house-sized washer and dryers every day. Do I get them if they smell funky or if someone was dirty? Sure, but we're talking about once a month that comforter is getting washed. Okay, so now we have a timeline of once a month, which, by the way, is in line with WebMD's recommendation of washing your comforter every 1 to 2 months. But, I'm pretty sure they're talking about an individual household and not a place of lodging. But this brings up a bigger point here as to why some hotels don't wash their comforters, and it's just because they lack the capacity, and we're going to see that in some of the other data points. So here's the next one. I used to work in a hotel. We only ever washed pillowcases and sheets. It was a Ramada. So this is comforting in one respect that, the pillowcases and sheets do get washed between every stay, and that should be the case at every hotel that has any kind of standards. But they also mentioned that they, essentially never saw the comforters getting washed, so that's a little bit concerning. But as you start to get into those budget hotels and motels, you're probably not going to be surprised to find out that they're not washing their bedding as often. But I think you will be surprised by some of these other brands that we're going to hear from. So here's another data point. Used to be a general manager at Days Inn. We only washed the comforters once a year, and that was simply because I instructed staff to do so. We had about 300 rooms and were very busy. Washing all those big blankets was not possible most of the time. Our hotel was severely understaffed and hours had to stay as low as possible. So Again, this goes back to that whole capacity thing. I think probably the number one reason why hotels would not be washing the comforters is just that they just don't have the capacity. It's just not practical for them. But this is a little crazy to me that they would only wash them once a year. I mean, if you think about all the people that may have been exposed to a comforter at a day's in the course of a year, I mean, that is the type of thing that just really kind of sends shivers down your spine and makes you want to stay away from certain types of properties for sure. Here's another data point. I worked at a Holiday Inn for a year and never saw them wash the comforters. First, I just want to say a disclaimer here that, these accounts are anonymous and anecdotal, so you can't make broad assumptions about individual brands based on these. I'm sure there are plenty of Holiday Inns and these other brands I mentioned that do a great job with their comforters, so, just throwing that out there. But, it's another instance of someone saying that they essentially did not wash the comforters for a year, and I kind of question this because I'm just thinking about how does a comforter go a year without getting any kind of visible stain on it that would require washing? I mean, I know some hotels just don't care and will check you into a room with like a horrendous stain on it. But I would think that after, 3 or 4 months, a comforter is just going to have a few stains on it where it's just completely unacceptable, even for, a hotel with pretty low standards. But, maybe I'm just wrong on this. But what about nicer hotels? Well, we have a couple of data points here. Worked at a Westin, comforters were only washed if stains were on them from previous guests, then on deep cleaning schedule depending on business levels. Worked housekeeping for a Westin. We were only supposed to change duvet covers if they were visibly stained. So first of all, I just have to say that this one actually hurts because Westin is my favorite hotel brand, and a lot of that is because of their bedding that I like so much. And so this is kind of heartbreaking to see. But, maybe it is true that even these higher end brands, they just don't have the capacity to do that level of laundry for the comforters. And maybe that's just the way it is. But it's not all negative. There are some good reports out there like this one. I worked at a Hampton Inn and we put clean duvet covers on before each new guest. I worked at a Hampton as well, and we were always extremely clean and washed everything after every guest. So it seems like, some of these brands, maybe they do have maybe some procedures and are more consistent in their cleaning. There's another one here. I used to work at a Radisson. We washed our comforters after every guest left. So I think the takeaway here is that many, if not most properties, do not clean comforters between guests unless there is some kind of obvious stain or pungent odor coming from the comforter. For the most part, or pretty much in every case, you should expect your sheets and pillowcases to be cleaned between each stay. And, I am sure that there are plenty of hotels that do wash the comforters between stays. It's just really difficult to know which ones do and how to verify that. So since we're hitting on this topic, let's just talk about a few reasons why hotels may not choose to wash their comforters and see if it's justified or not. So the first argument would be that it's just not possible to do that at a smaller hotel because they lack the laundry facilities and they just don't have the housekeeping capacity. Moreover, if they were to put that level of laundry output out there, they would have to replace the comforters so often that it just would not be economically feasible. And I actually think this is a pretty convincing argument, especially for those cheaper properties where they're not getting as much revenue as an expensive boutique hotel. So, I'm not an expert in hotel logistics, but it does seem like it may just not be economically feasible for a lot of these smaller properties to wash the bedding or the comforters between every stay. Another argument is that we always come into contact with other people's germs when traveling. So it could be in planes and shuttle buses or other places. It's just not a big deal. This one is less convincing to me because when you think about the contact that you have with other people in a comforter or a duvet, I mean, you potentially are coming into contact with bodily fluids that have been there for weeks or months, or in some cases, apparently to these reports, up to a year. And that's just a very different type of contact versus, sharing a door handle or something like that. So I understand where people are coming from this perspective, but it doesn't really sit that well with me. The third point is that people have been doing this for decades, right? We've been staying in hotels, sharing used comforters for decades, and there hasn't been any kind of widespread issue. I mean, okay, yes, there's been things like bed bugs, and I'm sure some viruses have been spread and things like that, but there's not this sort of well-known danger of checking into a hotel. And I think there is a lot of validity to that. In other words, it's just sort of like, this is just kind of a way of life. This is the way that we do things, and it's not that bad. So we all just sort of have to deal with it. But if you are uncomfortable with staying in a hotel that's potentially not washing their comforters, there are a few things that you can do. Number one, you can just ask for a fresh comforter. So this can be right after check-in, or maybe you get to your room and you notice like a strange odor coming from your comforter, so you request for a new one. So this could affect the cleaning logistics of the hotel, so it could take a while for them to accommodate you. But one of the things about this is they could just be taking a comforter from a different room. And so you may not actually be getting a new comforter, but it could be presented to you as such. So, you may have to, do a little sniff or something to try to get an idea of, is this a fresh comforter? But this is an option you can try, but it just may not be a foolproof option. Another thing you can do is use the extra blanket in the closet. So a lot of hotels, they have that blanket that's kind of hidden away up in the closet. You almost feel bad for it because it's never been used. And this kind of presents the same problem, but potentially even worse, because if a hotel knows that you're using their comforters and they're not washing those on a regular basis between stays, then how long ago do you think that they washed that blanket up in the closet? Also, some of them can be kind of weird blankets, like different colors or textures, and it may be harder to detect any stains on them. So I'm not really sure that I'd like to use that blanket in most cases. Another option is to just bring around your own blanket. And I'll admit that at first I felt a little weird doing this, just like as a grown man, essentially traveling around with a blankie. But I'm telling you that if you bring your own blanket, there's nothing better than having a blanket from home and a super comfortable hotel bed. It is like the best sleep you'll ever have. The problem is just that it takes up so much space in your checked luggage that it's not really practical to do, except for on like road trips, for example. So if you're having some issues with space in your luggage, then maybe you could just bring a sheet. Or, like we mentioned already, hotels do a pretty good job, apparently, of washing the pillowcases and the sheets. So you could just ask for an extra sheet whenever you get to the hotel. And maybe you can kind of fold that over the top half of the comforter, and that can create that barrier. Or maybe a second sheet could be enough to keep you warm so that you don't even need the comforter. And finally, you could just bring your own pajamas, maybe, long sleeve pajamas could reduce, maybe in combination with an extra sheet, you really can reduce the amount of contact that you have with that comforter. It's just another option, throwing it out there. Overall, though, I'd say it's really eye-opening that a lot of hotels don't wash their bedding between the stays. I'll say that I've stayed in a lot of hotels over the years, and I've probably been exposed to some pretty unthinkable things. But, I'm still here, I'm still fine, and so are, tens or hundreds of thousands, millions of other people. So I don't think it's probably as big of a deal as it seems like. It's just one of those things that's kind of difficult to get out of your head. So for me, I'm just going to continue to stay in hotels. I'm going to take some measures like bringing a blanket whenever I can. But at the end of the day, I'm just not going to let this whole thing consume me, even though if I were to, scan a bedspread with a black light or look at it under a microscope, I'm sure that I would be horrified. So I'm interested to hear from you, to hear your thoughts. Do you think that hotels are justified in not washing the comforters between stays, or do you understand that it's just maybe not practical and that we just kind of have to accept that this is just the way the world works? Let me know how you feel below.